In this week's episode, I'm joined by Davey Shlasko, founder and director of Think Again Training and Consulting. Davey is co-editor of Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice, author of the Trans Allyship Workbook, and parent of an extremely extroverted puppy who happens to be named Bernadette. This week, our conversation is about lessons in love for autistic folks, inclusive design at Virgin Media, pickleball in prison, standing firm on DEI, and more. Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith, and I'm a keynote speaker and writer. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I found is there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these actions and policies to help you build a more inclusive world. Let's get started. Davey, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining me. Will you tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So my name's Davey Shlasko. I use mixed pronouns. And with Think Again Training and Consulting, what I do is I support organizations that are mission focused, mostly nonprofits, to really integrate their values around equity and inclusion into everything they do, from their long-term planning, their day-to-day programming, their employee practices, everything.
I love it. And so tell me a little bit about the name Think Again. What are you wanting people to think again about?
That's such a great question. I think that very often when an organization requests training from us, they might sometimes want us to just have the answer. And I don't think that's actually how DEI works or how most things work. Very often we need to think of the best answer we can think of now and then think again and continue improving and make sure we're not getting stuck in our assumptions about what's working well enough or what's possible or impossible, but really always leaving the question open.
I love that. That makes a lot of sense. I talk a lot about assumptions and mistaken assumptions in the work that I do. So I think that makes a whole lot of sense. So Davey, talk to me a little bit about this dog named Bernadette. I've never heard of a dog named Bernadette before. In fact, I know very few humans named Bernadette, to be perfectly honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, she's a French bulldog, so she has a French name. She's a very fancy little lady, and she's so extremely extroverted, and we got her during peak COVID lockdowns, where really most of the interactions with strangers that we were having were just other people walking their dogs. So
Sure.
she loves to love on everybody. I was recently asked by another human named Bernadette if the dog responds to Bernie, and I said, people can call her that, but she won't listen. She likes to be known by her whole name.
I would concur. I feel the exact same way. People can call me that, but I won't listen. I say, unless we're related. Forget about it. Cool. It's great to meet you, Davey, and I'm thrilled to have you on the show. In this week's 5 Things newsletter, I wrote a little bit about an opportunity I had to write an op-ed piece for Crain's Chicago Business here in Chicago. So, I wrote about the current state of DEI, and I've recently been hired to do a workshop for leaders about this as well. And, how do we talk about DEI in this current landscape? And what I'm really working to do with our current clients, everyone I talk to, is to really empower folks to promote and defend DEI. I think it's really important that folks have a sense of how they can talk about it in a way that makes sense for them and relates to their own personal story and what's important to them. So my goal is to sort of equip leaders with their own unique set of talking points so they feel empowered to defend and promote DEI. So I'm wondering sort of, Davey, what sort of conversations you're having with your clients right now in this current landscape?
Yeah. I read that article that you wrote, and um, I really appreciated the points you made, particularly around the words we use are often less important than the content of the work we're doing.
Absolutely.
So, as a consulting group, one of the things we're thinking of is, do we sometimes need to be proposing projects using other language?
Mhm.
So, for example, we often propose an equity focused strategic planning process. Well, we can just propose a strategic planning process. That's what it is. And we can do it in an equity focused way, whether or not we call it that, right?
Right.
Most of the organizations that we work with were never doing DEI because it was popular. They weren't trying to avoid discrimination because discrimination's illegal, right? They were trying to do it because it actually aligns with their values and their purpose. So those motivations are still there. It's still
Mm.
good for these organizations' purposes, and it's still good for business in many cases. And the part that really struck me from that article that is so central to how we do things as well is when you really integrate DEI into everything you do, you're not like doing DEI anymore. DEI is not an activity you do, it is
That's
a
right.
way that you do everything.
That's right.
Um, and you don't have to call it the DEI way, you can call it the way that's effective for the most people, which is
Mhm.
what DEI really means.
Absolutely. And I tell my clients that in most cases, in many organizations, there's at least one core value that is somehow related to the work of DEI, right? So sometimes it's just a matter of connecting those dots as you talk about this, as you talk to your team about this, as you try to get buy in. Make the case that it's already there. It's already part of the
Mm-hmm.
values, and spin it however you need to. But in many cases, the work should already be, sort of poised to go. And you're right, it's not an activity.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's get into this week's good vibes. So, the first story this week comes from UCLA Health, which is launching Peers for Dating, a groundbreaking 20-week program designed to help adults with autism navigate romantic relationships. So, participants will gain essential skills such as choosing appropriate partners, online dating etiquette, handling rejection, and more. And it combines group sessions and real world coaching. And I love this. What do you think, Davey?
I really appreciate this program. And one thing that struck me in the article about it is that some of the, I think it was parents of participants, although the parents are participants also, um, one of the parents said, I wish we would have had this and this would be useful for lots of people, whether or not they identify as autistic. And I absolutely agree. I think, dating, just like every other aspect of life, can really easily get distorted with power dynamics and weird assumptions. And
Mm-hmm.
we should be learning and teaching explicitly how to do it in a way that works well for folks. I have one curiosity about the program that might make me even more excited about it, which is I'm really curious whether autistic adults were involved in designing it,
Mm.
because there is such a history of adults who are not autistic designing programs for kids with autism, and adults who identify as autistic kind of their wisdom doesn't get utilized as it should to really design those programs well.
That makes sense. Well, it seems like the Peers program is a bigger program nationally, and then
Mm-hmm.
this Peers for Dating is sort of a unique take on it. So, my hope is that autistic adults were involved in the creation. That's always the best way. I completely agree. You know what? And I think you're right. I will say that just to be just to be honest and vulnerable, I didn't date much in high school because I didn't really know that I was gay, right? I didn't know at all. And so then when I came out in college, pretty much as soon as I got there, I didn't have the skills. So I could have used a dating for second adolescence, queeros kind of thing,
Absolutely.
because they are important life skills regardless of what you have going on.
Yeah.
All right, the second story this week comes from Virgin Media, which has a new London headquarters that redefines inclusivity with soundproof workstations, wheelchair accessible meeting rooms, retreat rooms, gender neutral toilets, and multi-faith rooms with voodoo facilities. So they did collaborate with employees and DEI specialists, the architects did, to create spaces for diverse mobility needs, neurodiverse sensitivities, and sensory preferences. Lots of things that they did. Lots. They did so thoughtfully when designing this new space.
I just love this story. And again, it speaks to your point from that article that it's not, to me, this story isn't about doing something in a DEI way or doing the architecture in a DEI way, right? It's about, if you hadn't done that in what gets called a DEI way, you would have essentially been designing it for like straight, white, non-disabled, right-handed men who are 6 feet tall, right? I mean, just
Yeah.
on a very, this is like far from the biggest deal about office design, but like my feet don't touch the ground in most standard office furniture, and I'm not that small. Like you can just design it to work for a wide variety of people instead of accidentally designing it for just a few people. And thinking of this in the first place before people come in and say, this room's actually really uncomfortable, is so much more efficient, so much more effective, and probably really reduces the need for people to disclose a particular reason that they need an individual accommodation, because a wider range of needs are met by default, and that's fantastic.
I think you're right. And also I think it reduces the stigma around disclosing, because there's already a discussion around all of these inclusive features, right? And so it's already normalized in a way. And so I think if there's something else that has to be disclosed, well, then it seems to me that it would probably be a safer space to have that disclosure than perhaps another organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's a need that they haven't thought of, the fact that they have thought of so many really signals that the organization's going to be interested in hearing about those needs they hadn't thought of.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just a few others like color contrasted furniture, left-handed appliances. Davey, I actually have never even heard of left-handed appliances before.
Oh, sure. Well, I think of scissors. Like right-handed scissors don't work well if
Sure.
you use them in your left hand, right?
Right.
I lived in the Bay Area for a little while, and there used to be a store in San Francisco that was just left-handed stuff. And I knew about scissors, but I hadn't thought before I went into that store, it's also about like can openers, knives in some cases are like sharpened differently depending on what hand you're expected to be using them with. All kinds of things that just had not occurred to me as a right-handed person.
Wow. Yeah, I was aware of the scissors, but not really the rest. Interesting. Yeah, I mean that's the thing I love doing about this show, is that I'm always learning really fun stuff. Okay, the third story this week is about the Los Angeles wildfires. We talked a little bit about this last week and some of the commitments made, but here's just a ton of financial commitments made from people like Taylor Swift, Leonardo DiCaprio, Hyatt, Netflix, Disney, Beyonce. I mean, so many organizations are stepping up. Individuals, companies are really stepping up to help those victims and fire refugees. And I certainly hope a lot of that money is going to Altadena, but they're raising tons of money. So I want to give a shout out. Make sure that list gets put in the show notes.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to see this and to see the list and more examples that keep coming out. I think this is an area where we really need to be thinking there's not just one solution. We need to use all the solutions at once.
Yeah.
And we know the government is putting a lot of money and resource into it. And we also need everybody to pitch in. I love hearing about the corporations, the foundations that are contributing in these ways. And I want to also lift up that I think there are a lot of people who will never be recognized because they're small, right? Because they're not wealthy. They have a spare room or they have a car and they're just giving people rides. People are really showing up in a sort of small scale mutual aid way. And we saw that after the recent hurricane as well, that a lot of folks just started filling in the gaps where major funders hadn't gotten to yet, and that's beautiful. The ways that people are showing up to take care of each other are really important.
Absolutely. And there's always something special about service and how it brings people together. I always look for the beauty in the tragedy. So those are the types of things that get me feeling a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
All right, the fourth story this week is about pickleball. The Pickleball for Incarcerated Communities League, Pickle, P-I-C-L, offers camaraderie, stress relief, and personal growth for inmates, and this program is now in every Connecticut correctional institution and in over 40 facilities in 12 different states. Participants play daily, compete in tournaments, and even coach fellow inmates. Now, Davey, I play pickleball 5 or 6 times a week, so this story is very, very near and dear to my heart.
That's fantastic. I don't play pickleball, but I'm excited about this story. In reading about it, one of the, I guess, coaches was saying part of the reason pickleball in particular is so cool is that it's kind of a community-based sport and not necessarily a competitive one.
Yep.
And so it's really easy. The like sports culture of it is collaborative and supportive. People helping each other out, helping each other improve, and have fun. And I think that's exactly the kind of activity that can be helpful and healing for folks who are incarcerated. I was also really glad to see the one of the founders has also worked with another organization called Last Prisoner Project. Really, and part of what this says to me is, again, we need all the solutions, right? We need to make things better for people who are incarcerated now, and also we just need to have fewer people incarcerated and for less time. And knowing that this organization is like cognizant of both sides of that makes me feel really good about how they're leading the effort to have this particular sport in prisons.
Yeah,
And
I agree. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the acronym is really on point. I appreciate a very smart acronym for a program like this.
Yeah, it is totally on point. It's because it's often the sport is often played in doubles, right? So 4 at a time, and the winners stay on and split, and the losers leave and paddle up. And so you always are playing with new partners, and it's always an opportunity to build new relationships and show support for others. So it's really very much by design set up to be inclusive if you're playing with kind, sweet people. All right. The last story this week is a couple of shout outs to companies standing firm on DEI. Apple and Costco doubling down on their commitments after shareholder resolutions. Both companies have urged their shareholders to reject resolutions by a conservative think tank pushing for DEI rollbacks. So Apple has highlighted its longstanding efforts and its successes with its supplier diversity program, with its employee groups. And Costco is really focused on the business side and knows that DEI is making sure that they can attract, retain top talent. I mean, Costco is very well known for paying well and having a very low turnover rate, especially within that retail space. So they just know that this is a competitive advantage. So shout out to those two companies doing the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we've been saying, they're not doing it only because it's the right thing. They're doing it because it works for them.
Yes.
And part of my hope for this story would be that lots of smaller employers see this and think, oh yeah, okay, Apple can keep going with DEI. We should keep going too. Because, I mean, part of any employer is they're competing for employees as well as customers.
Mm-hmm.
And employees are going to go where they are valued and where the default policies and practices and everything that's in place there works well for lots of different kinds of people, including them, not just for one really narrow group of people.
Yeah, I completely agree. All right, well, let's move into this week's Good Vibes to Go. I'll share my good vibe to go and then invite you to share yours. So my good vibe to go is to check out Alok's new comedy special, Biology. So it's comedy and poetry, and it is available on YouTube. We'll put that in the show notes. It will make you laugh. It will make you think. It is a really entertaining show from Alok, who's a non-binary South Asian performance artist, really incredible talent. So check that out. Davey, do you have a good vibe to go to share with our folks?
Can I sneak in too?
Oh, sure.
I just thought of a new one. So one that I've been thinking about is really sort of practicing discernment about what scale of solution can we aim for. Um, Thinking about that in terms of the story about the wildfires, that sometimes what I can do as an individual or what we can do as a small organization might not be everything, but it's absolutely a really crucial piece of something. Um, Sometimes when we see a problem at an interpersonal level, intervening at an interpersonal level isn't the only option. We could also intervene at a policy level to solve an interpersonal situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just really practicing, again, not jumping to an assumption about what level of solutions required, but considering the options.
Good advice.
Another really specific good vibe is a program that my organization houses but isn't actually in charge of, called Cross Class Dialogue Circle, which is a nonprofit community-based project that brings people together across differences of socioeconomic background and financial experiences to build relationships across those differences. Because we know that, especially in nonprofit workplaces, many people's jobs require cross-class relationships with clients, with board members, with donors, and they're weird. They're always across a power dynamic. They're awkward, very challenging for people in the U.S. to talk about class, and in fact, it's not usually part of the list of isms. Right? Classism isn't on the list necessarily of the isms people talk about.
Sure.
But to solve the pretty complex problems in our society right now requires that we be able to collaborate across those differences and learn from people who have been directly impacted by economic inequality and learn from people who have privilege and have gained tools that way.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, we'll make sure your good vibes to go get put in this week's show notes. And Davey, how can folks get in touch with you?
The easiest way is through our website, thinkagaintraining.com. We're also on LinkedIn as Think Again Training and Consulting. We're on Facebook and Instagram, but using those somewhat less these days. Look us up, join the newsletter, which is like once a quarter or so. Stay in touch.
Awesome. Thank you for joining me. You've been a wonderful guest. And folks, if you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Have a great week. Thank you for listening to 5 Things in 15 Minutes. I hope you found yourself inspired by at least one of this week's stories. If you did, would you mind sharing it with a colleague and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform? And if you don't already get my 5 Things newsletter, join at 5thingsdei.com. I'm Bernadette Smith, and I'll see you next week right here for 5 Things in 15 Minutes, bringing good vibes to DEI.